A lot of members of the left are starting to realize that wokeness is destroying America, which is why of late you've seen some conversations about how you're not supposed to use the term wokeness, which is weird since they made it up. And so I'm fine with using the term wokeness. I intend on continuing to use that word. It is their fault that it became a poisonous word, not mine. It's because the idea is incredibly stupid.
In an unexpected twist, Ben Shapiro has sparked a controversy by criticizing woke culture.
Wokeness is destroying America, which is why of late you've seen some conversations about how you're not supposed to use the term wokeness, which is weird since they made it up.
Causing its supporters to be outraged and desperately searching for a reply. What occurs when a cultural movement gains enough influence to control every facet of our existence? Wokeness has permeated all areas, from entertainment to education, social media to corporate meetings. Have you observed it? Wokeness originated as a movement of awareness, but transformed into an ideology that demands strict conformity. What used to concern justice now looks like a moral tyranny. What led us to this point?
We're going to talk about how wokeness is destroying America. And here's the thing. A lot of members of the left are starting to realize that wokeness is destroying America, which is why of late you've seen some conversations about how you're not supposed to use the term wokeness, which is weird since they made it up. And so I'm fine with using the term wokeness. I intend on continuing to use that word. It is their fault that it became a poisonous word, not mine. It's because the idea is incredibly stupid.
But what if someone had the audacity to confront this cultural giant? Introducing Ben Shapiro, the individual who doesn't merely discuss wokeness, he dismantles it using facts and logic.
It's got a nearly impenetrable code. The code is constantly changing. It is constantly moving. You have no idea what the standard is from day to day. But that code is brought to you by a priestly caste of really intelligent and woke people who will be able to absolve you of sin so long as you listen to everything they say. There is an intermediary.
Shapiro contends that woke ideology flourishes on untruths. America is irreparably racist, individual responsibility is an illusion, and truth is relative. However, there's an issue. When truth is subjective, who determines what is real? Shapiro has consistently highlighted the inconsistencies in woke ideology, demonstrating that its basis relies more on emotion than on reason.
Got sacrificial rights. Right? People who are bad, who do not mouth the proper catechism, are immediately destroyed, and there's no forgiveness.
At one time, it advocates for acceptance. At the next, it dismisses anyone who challenges its beliefs.
Okay, Ben, are your children circumcised? Did you circumcise your children?
Yes, I have two sons and they're both circumcised.
Why would you do that? Isn't that kind of hypocritical?
Nope, I'm circumcised. My works just fine.
Shapiro emphasizes how this double standard manifests in contemporary media channels that promote specific stories while suppressing those that contradict their objectives.
And, of course, we have to thank the protesters outside because we're always happy when our fellow Americans are exercising their First Amendment rights, even if they are incoherent.
Why is that? In woke culture, emotions take precedence over facts, and disagreement is not permitted. Consider, for instance, the notion that the United States is inherently racist. Shapiro refutes this argument by highlighting evidence that income differences frequently relate more to education and individual choices, rather than race alone. However, rather than engaging in debates on these issues, woke activists brand them as offensive and try to completely silence the conversation.
I can define womanhood for you, which is a set of characteristics associated with females, and a woman as someone who exhibits said womanhood.
Okay, well, you have just used the word female and woman to define each other. So you say a woman is a female, but not a biological female. A female is a woman and a woman is a female, but at no point have you added any new content.
No.
If their reasoning was solid, what is there to fear from open discussion? He also targets the notion that personal accountability is a fabrication.
Let me ask you this. Okay, I won't ask you how old. I will ask you how old you are, okay? Because you're young enough that it's probably not insulting to ask you. So.
I'm 22, so I'm probably young and naive, right?
No. Why aren't you 60? Why aren't you 60? And why can't you identify as 60? What is the problem with you identifying as 60? You can't magically change your gender. You can't magically change your sex. You can't magically change your age.
You can still legally change it. People recognize
You can't legally change your age, by the way.
Obviously, you can change your name, you can change your sex, you can change your identity.
Just because you can do things legally doesn't mean that they are correct biologically. You could do.
If success is entirely determined by systemic oppression, how do numerous people from underprivileged backgrounds overcome their situations? Shapiro claims that recognizing systemic problems doesn't diminish personal agency, but woke culture maintains that diligence and meritocracy are antiquated ideas. The outcome? A societal trend that undermines personal growth, champions victim mentality, and vilifies individuals who have the courage to pose difficult inquiries. Shapiro not only reveals this, but he also compels his opponents to face their own inconsistencies.
Why are we mainstreaming delusion?
It's not delusion.
Why would you call it delusion?
Because Bruce Caitlyn Jenner, I'll call him Caitlyn Jenner.
No,
because
it's her. You're not being polite to the pronoun.
Because
disrespect.
Okay, forget about the disrespect. Facts don't care about your feelings. It turns out that every chromosome, every cell in Caitlyn Jenner's body is male with the exception of some of his sperm cells.
Which is why they are afraid of him. But what if an individual had the audacity to confront this cultural giant? Introducing Ben Shapiro, the individual who not only debates wokeness, but also demolishes it using facts and reason.
I would try to avoid specifically offending you by using a pronoun that you don't like, but I also am not going to bow to the sort of social convention now that I'm supposed to use a pronoun of people's choosing rather than a pronoun that accurately describes the truth.
Shapiro states that woke ideology flourishes on untruths. America is unchangeably racist, individual accountability is an illusion, and truth is relative. He reveals these stories, asking why disagreement is suppressed rather than discussed. Has wokeness moved beyond politics to establish itself as a new belief system? Think of this wokeness as having holy scriptures, ethical guidelines, and revered leaders. What occurs when you violate its commandments? Shapiro compares wokeness to a cult in which the rules are always shifting, and adherence to ideology is strictly mandated. You're either part of it or you're cast out. Shapiro reveals how this occurrence flourishes on fear. Individuals conform, not due to conviction, but out of fear of being socially excluded. Wokeness is not centered on progress. It focuses on power. And those who carry it? They have no interest in justice. They have a keen interest in control. Are companies adopting wokeness due to genuine belief or fear? When companies such as Ford put a rainbow flag on their vehicles.
Ford has decided for Pride Month, they're going to release a rainbow Ford F-150. Again, rainbow wheel rolling over a human face forever. And Ford's F-150 brand is supposed to be the manly men who are like picking up lumber in the back of their...
Is it authentic backing or a frantic effort to dodge criticism? The issue isn't if companies ought to back inclusivity, but rather if their motivation is based on principle or self-interest. Ben Shapiro contends that corporate wokeness is not about principles, but rather about protecting themselves from the masses.
The intermediary between you and wokeness. The intermediary is fairly obvious, right? It is all the members of the New York Times editorial board. It is all the people who tweet angrily on Twitter. It is your late night host, but even they have intermediaries. They have to call in some of their black friends, as we saw on all of the late night TV shows last night, in order to interpret blackness for them so that they can absolve themselves of their own white privilege.
Businesses observe the consequences of non-compliance, protests, negative publicity, and public fury on social media. It's not just about offering a quality product anymore. It's about demonstrating ideological correctness to prevent being seen as problematic. However, does this approach prove effective? Or does it generate bitterness among consumers who recognize the deception? Woke activism isn't focused on equality. It revolves around power. It's about controlling what companies are allowed to do and penalizing those who don't comply. When companies give in, they not only harm their profits, but also foster a culture where dissent leads to cancellation. Where does this all conclude? That's the actual question. And if history offers any insight, the answer is certainly not positive. Is gender a social construct, or is biology significant? Woke culture claims that gender is completely fluid and disconnected from biological truth. However, Shapiro not only disagrees, but also deconstructs this argument using concrete evidence. In his view, gender is not merely a personal sentiment, but a biological fact encoded within our DNA. Male and female represent unique biological classifications rather than interchangeable identities, each having specific functions in human reproduction and physiology. Nevertheless, in spite of these scientific truths, woke culture advocates for a narrative that emotions take precedence over biology. In reply, Shapiro poses a straightforward but impactful question: what is a woman? This apparently simple question has transformed into a litmus test. revealing the inconsistencies inherent in woke ideology. Numerous supporters of gender fluidity find it challenging to give a clear explanation, often using circular definitions such as, "A woman is anyone who identifies as a woman." Yet, if gender lacks objective significance, how can it be justified as a valid identity? Aside from the discussion, the consequences of rejecting biological truth are significant. We currently inhabit a world where sports, medical care, and even language are being redefined to support the idea that biology is a choice. Women athletes are losing scholarships, kids are being prescribed life-changing hormones, and terms like mother and breastfeeding are being replaced with gender-neutral options. Shapiro contends that sacrificing objective truth for the sake of ideology leads to confusion, inconsistency, and a cultural environment in which fundamental facts are viewed as offensive expressions. The issue that persists is to what extent society will dismiss reality for the sake of ideology. Is science being altered to align with ideological beliefs? When physicians claim that biology doesn't matter, are they expressing views as scientists or as advocates? Shapiro critiques science influenced by politics, where findings are based on ideology instead of evidence. He reveals how organizations yield to pressure instead of evidence. Medical associations that previously upheld biological truths now contort themselves to conform with political correctness. But what does this imply for real medical treatment? Science flourishes through questioning, but today, probing politically delicate subjects can lead to career devastation. Physicians and scholars who oppose the woke agreement face the danger of being ostracized, leading to their professional lives being devastated. How can we rely on medical advice when it's influenced by activists instead of factual evidence? Shapiro points out that previously objective areas such as psychology and endocrinology now serve ideological interests instead of adhering to biological realities. The most surprising aspect? Even pediatric healthcare is not excluded. We now observe that treatments and surgeries are advised for children even though there are no long-term studies on their outcomes. This is not merely careless, it's permanent. The effects of medicalizing ideology are severe, and once these interventions are given, there's no going back. Shapiro contends that changing a child's growth according to political trends is not healthcare, but activism disguised as science. However, challenging this practice can lead to doctors losing their positions. The issue goes beyond medical ethics. It endangers the core principles of science. If physicians are afraid to tell the truth, what does that mean for advancements in medicine? More crucially, what are the implications for society when science shifts from being about facts to being about adherence? In woke culture, both expressing oneself and remaining quiet can be considered acts of violence. How does it function? If voicing an opinion is considered oppression, yet remaining silent is seen as complicity, what options do we have left? This unachievable benchmark fosters a climate of anxiety, causing individuals to think twice before speaking, aware that they might be branded as a bigot merely for being themselves. The rules aren't merely perplexing, they're meant to be impossible to achieve. Shapiro reveals that this double standard is not concerning justice. It is focused on control. Envision a reality where a comedian's joke amounts to actual violence, yet defacing a business under the guise of activism is deemed expression, where challenging woke narratives is seen as harmful, yet suppressing dissent is considered progress. The outcome? All are compelled to yield. This ridiculousness transforms simple communication into a precarious endeavor. Speak excessively and you'll be canceled. Speak too briefly and you're an accomplice. The markers change continually, guaranteeing no one is ever secure. At this pace, maybe the sole method to prevent causing offense is to gesture our ideas, or as Shapiro humorously suggests, turn to interpretive dance. Yet even that could be considered problematic. This environment of constant anger does not encourage conversation. It destroys it. If both speech and quietness are considered violence, then logical discussion cannot occur. When discussion disappears, free thought vanishes too. Is that the type of community we desire? However, it deteriorates further. This belief isn't merely societal pressure, it's transforming into legislation. Laws against hate speech, requirements in workplaces, and guidelines in academia are progressively regulating what can and cannot be expressed. What occurs when simple words turn into criminal acts? If claiming men are not women is deemed violent, what is the limit? When speech is deemed illegal, silence is not merely complicity, but an act of surrender, and yielding is precisely what the woke movement calls for. Thus, the inquiry persists. Who genuinely determines what is deemed offensive? And even more crucially, why are we permitting this? Is wokeness the emerging faith? And if it is, what implications does that hold for society? What is your opinion? Leave a comment below and let's start this conversation. Shapiro deconstructs wokeness as a movement founded on anxiety and falsehoods. However, the more significant question is, where does this take us?